At a busy local diner, a poor young black girl resists her hunger to save money for her mother's gift, but when she sees an elderly woman publicly humiliated for losing her wallet, something stronger than hunger stirs inside her. Without hesitation, she sacrifices everything she's saved to shield the woman from shame. What she doesn't know is that this small, selfless act will set in motion a chain of events that will forever change the course of her life. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thought. At the very front booth of Sunrise Diner, right by the big glass window where the golden afternoon light spilled in thick and heavy like honey, Lena sat with her back straight but her small shoulders tense. The rough cover of a plastic menu spread out flat in front of her, her fingers tracing the faded letters, not really reading, just trying to pass the time, trying to make the gnawing ache in her belly quieter. Even though the smell of fried chicken, fresh bread, and melted butter filled the air so strong it seemed to wrap itself around her and pull at her from every direction. The diner was full, not packed tight, but busy enough that every table seemed alive with clinking forks, soft laughter, and the steady scrape of plates being cleared away. And yet Lena, sitting there alone in her faded jeans and second-hand hoodie, felt like she wasn't really part of it, like she was invisible, tucked into her corner, waiting for Jessie to finish her shift, waiting for something to pull her out of the hollow space she was curled up inside. The afternoon sunlight spilled across the booth, catching the rich brown of Lena's skin, bathing her in a soft glow that seemed to both hide and reveal her all at once. She was thin, too thin for her age, and her messy brown hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail with a stretched-out rubber band, little strands falling out to frame her face, where her deep brown eyes kept flickering toward the plates being carried past her. Thick slabs of meatloaf, drenched in gravy, golden piles of fries steaming hot, thick slices of pie, dripping cherry syrup onto clean white plates, and every time she looked, her stomach answered with a low growl that she tried to press down with the flat of her hand. The money in her pocket, a crumpled handful of bills she had saved for months, felt heavier than any hunger she could feel, and every time her fingers brushed against it, she remembered why she was here. Why she was waiting, why she would not, could not, spend even a dime on herself, no matter how much her body screamed for food. That money was for her mother's birthday, for the soft blue sweater she had seen through the dusty shop window 3 months ago, the one she knew her mother would never buy for herself. The one that, if Lena could manage it, would finally bring a real smile to her mother's tired face. Outside the window, the city buzzed with noise and color, but inside the diner, Lena's world was small and heavy and thick with smells she couldn't afford, sounds she couldn't join in, and a kind of quiet hope that pressed against her ribs so hard it almost hurt. She leaned back against the cracked vinyl seat, feeling it squeak and shift under her weight, and closed her eyes for a second, just a second, breathing in deep, willing herself to last just a little longer, telling herself that she could wait, that she had waited through worse days, that she could survive this one too. When she opened her eyes again, they were drawn, almost against her will, to the register, where a tall woman in a crisp navy suit was laughing and flipping through a thick stack of bills like it was nothing, her jewelry catching the light and flashing with every careless movement. Lena looked away quickly, her cheeks burning, her hands curling into fists in her lap, feeling the sharp edges of hunger, shame, and longing knot together inside her chest. And so she sat, silent and still, the world spinning loud and fast around her, the smells and sounds of the diner swirling past her like a river she couldn't step into, clutching tight to her little island of waiting, holding on to her promise to herself and her mother, because sometimes all a person has to hold on to is a promise, and Lena knew better than anyone that promises, once broken, don't easily come back. Just as Lena shifted in her seat, trying to ease the cramp building in her legs, a loud voice snapped across the diner, cutting through the easy hum of conversations and clinking plates. Heads turned toward the far side of the room, where George, the burly manager in a stained apron, loomed over an older white woman standing by her table, her hands clutching a small leather bag close to her chest. "You don't have money, you don't eat here," George barked, his face red with anger. The woman, tiny under the weight of his words, shook her head desperately, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, I must have dropped my wallet. Just a moment, I can find it." George laughed, a sharp, cruel sound that filled the space. "Yeah, sure. Heard that before. Lost your money but found your appetite, huh?" Lena's stomach twisted as she watched. Around the diner, people buried their faces deeper into their meals, some sneaking glances but quickly looking away. No one moved to help. The woman, Marianne, stood frozen, her face pale, her voice growing smaller. "I had it when I got out of the cab." George cut her off with a sneer. "Had money for a cab but none for dinner, huh? Convenient." The silence that followed pressed down heavy, and Lena, heart-hammering, pushed herself up from the booth, the loud squeak of the vinyl seat drawing every eye in the room. She walked forward, legs shaking but determined, planting herself between George and Marianne. "That's enough," she said, her voice small but firm. George turned, arms crossed, smirking. "You gonna pay for her, kid?" Lena's hand dipped into her pocket, pulling out the wad of bills she had spent months saving for her mother's birthday. Without thinking, she slapped it down on the table between them, the bills crumpled but real. "There," she said, throat tight. "No more excuses." George stared for a long moment, then snatched the money up, grumbling as he stuffed it into the register. Without another word, he waved Marianne off like she was nothing. Marianne, tears shining in her blue eyes, scribbled something quickly on a napkin, pressed it into Lena's hand, and whispered, "If you ever need anything." Before Lena could answer, the older woman hurried out into the bright, busy street, leaving Lena standing alone, the napkin clutched tight, the last of her savings locked away behind the counter, and the smells of food she could no longer touch, thick in the air around her. Lena sat back down at her booth, her legs trembling slightly under the table, the crumpled napkin Marianne had given her still clutched tight in her sweaty palm, the heavy scent of fried chicken and warm bread hanging thick around her. But now it no longer made her stomach growl. It only made the hollow feeling inside her bigger, deeper, more painful. The diner slowly slipped back into its usual hum, waitresses weaving through the tables, dishes clinking, voices rising and falling like waves against the shore. But Lena felt separate from it all, like she was floating above the noise, disconnected and numb, her mind circling around the simple, brutal truth that the money she had saved, every coin, every dollar tucked away with care, was gone, just like that. She stared at the napkin in her hand. The ink smudged slightly where Marianne's shaky fingers had written a phone number, a small promise in a world that didn't usually offer promises. But Lena didn't know what she would ever say if she called. Didn't know if it even mattered. She sat there a little longer, trying to gather herself, ignoring the sympathetic glances a few strangers threw her way, the way one waitress hesitated like she wanted to say something but didn't. And finally Lena reached for her phone, wanting to check the time, to distract herself, to do anything but sit there, feeling the walls closing in around her. As she shifted in the booth, her elbow knocked the edge of the table, and the napkin slipped from her fingers, floating down to the floor like a slow, lazy feather. Lena sighed, moving to pick it up, and that's when she saw it. Just under the booth across from hers, tucked deep into the shadows, almost invisible against the dark floor, a small black object, lying still, half hidden by the edge of the seat. She frowned, leaning closer, her heart picking up speed for reasons she couldn't explain, and stretched out her hand, her fingertips brushing cold leather. Pulling it free, she realized immediately what it was, a wallet. A little worn at the edges, but clean and neat, the kind of wallet someone careful would carry. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it, and there, tucked behind a clear plastic window, was a photograph. Old but well kept, showing Marianne smiling, standing in front of a little white house with blue shutters, her arms wrapped around a young woman whose smile was just as bright. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was hers. Marianne's. She had dropped it. Everything she said had been true. Her heart hammered in her ears as she shot up from the booth, scanning the diner, the door, the sidewalks outside, but Marianne was gone, lost in the blur of evening traffic and bustling crowds under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. Lena's hand tightened around the wallet as she pushed through the door, stepping into the cool night air, turning left then right, her eyes darting from face to face, searching, hoping. But there was no sign of her. A cold knot twisted in her stomach. She couldn't just hold on to it. She had to do something. Without giving herself time to think, Lena shoved the wallet into the pocket of her hoodie and started down the block, her sneakers slapping against the concrete, weaving through the early evening crowd toward the small police station she knew was only a few streets away, her breath coming quick and fast, her mind racing ahead of her feet. When she pushed through the heavy glass door into the bright, sterile lobby of the station, the sharp smell of disinfectant stung her nose, and behind the counter, a tired-looking officer looked up, his eyes lingering a beat too long on her hoodie and scuffed shoes before he spoke in a voice that was more bored than concerned. "Something you need, kid?" Lena swallowed hard, stepping up to the counter and pulling the wallet from her pocket with both hands, setting it down carefully like it was something fragile. "I found this," she said, her voice steady even though her heart felt like it was shaking. "It belongs to a lady, Marianne. She was at the Sunrise Diner, but I lost her before I could give it back." The officer gave her a long look, then picked up the wallet, flipping it open, checking the ID tucked behind the photo, nodding slowly. "All right," he said, grabbing a small notepad. "What's your name? You got a number in case they want to reach you?" Lena hesitated for just a second, then rattled off her information, her voice quiet but clear, watching as the officer scribbled it down without much ceremony. He nodded again, tucking the wallet under the counter, and gave her a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We'll handle it from here." And just like that, it was done. Lena turned, stepping back into the cool night air, the heavy door thunking shut behind her, the noise of the city rushing back in to fill the space, and for a moment she just stood there on the sidewalk, her hands buried deep in her pockets, staring up at the sky, where the first few stars were starting to poke through the darkening blue. She told herself she had done the right thing, that the wallet would find its way back to Marianne, that it would all work out somehow, but deep down, the hollow ache inside her remained, a weight pressing against her ribs, making it hard to breathe, hard to believe that sometimes doing the right thing could feel so much like losing. The walk home felt longer than it ever had, each step dragging heavier than the last, the cold evening air biting at Lena's cheeks, the city lights blurring slightly at the edges of her vision, though she blinked hard and told herself it was just the wind. She kept her hands deep in her pockets, her head down, weaving through the thinning crowds, the low hum of passing cars and distant laughter only making her feel smaller, more alone. By the time she reached the cracked steps leading up to her apartment building, the knot in her stomach had grown so tight it hurt to breathe, and every part of her wanted to turn around, to walk somewhere, anywhere else, to not have to face the truth waiting on the other side of the door. She climbed the narrow staircase slowly, her sneakers scuffing against the worn linoleum, the hallway buzzing faintly under the flickering fluorescent lights. At the end of the hall, their door stood slightly ajar, the weak glow of the kitchen lights spilling out into the dim corridor like a crooked invitation. Lena pushed it open gently, stepping inside, the familiar smell of instant noodles and old coffee washing over her, wrapping around her in a way that should have been comforting, but tonight only made her chest tighten even more. Her mother, Maria, sat at the small kitchen table, a chipped mug of tea cradled between her hands, her tired face softening into a small, worried smile when she looked up and saw Lena standing there, hunched over like the weight of the world was sitting square on her back. "Hey, baby," Maria said, her voice low and warm, but Lena could hear the edge of concern under it, could see it in the way her mother's brows knitted together. "You okay? You're late." For a moment, Lena couldn't speak. Couldn't find the words. She just stood there, blinking hard against the sting in her eyes, swallowing past the lump in her throat. Finally, she crossed the kitchen in a few quick steps, dropping heavily into the chair across from her mother, the legs scraping a harsh sound against the worn linoleum. I... Lena started, her voice cracking, and she had to stop, clenching her fists in her lap, gathering herself. "I was at the diner. And something happened." Maria leaned in closer, setting her mug down with a soft clink, her whole body going still, waiting, listening, the way only a mother who knew too much about disappointment could listen. Lena sucked in a shaky breath and told her everything. About Marianne, about George shouting, about standing up and giving away the money, about finding the wallet too late and rushing to the police station with it clutched in her shaking hands. Every word spilled out in a rush, tumbling over itself, her voice rising and falling with the tide of her guilt, her frustration, her aching hunger to have made a different choice, to have been stronger somehow, smarter somehow. When she finished, the apartment was so quiet she could hear the faint buzz of the fridge motor kicking on, the soft tick of the cheap wall clock inching forward second by second. She stared down at her hands, at the faint lines of dirt under her nails, too ashamed to look up, waiting for the disappointment, the sadness, the anger she felt sure would come. But Maria didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached across the table, her hand rough and warm and familiar, and cupped Lena's cheek, tilting her daughter's face up gently until their eyes met. There were tears shining in Maria's eyes, but they didn't look like sadness. They looked like pride, fierce and aching and raw. "You gave away all your savings," Maria said, her voice trembling but steady. "All of it, for someone you didn't even know." Lena nodded, her chin wobbling, biting hard on her lower lip to keep it from trembling. Maria's smile was small, tired, but real, and it lit up her worn face in a way that made Lena's chest ache even more. "Baby," she whispered, brushing a thumb across Lena's cheekbone, "you already gave me the best gift. You gave someone hope when they needed it. That's worth more than anything you could have wrapped in a box." The words hit Lena like a warm wave, crashing over the cold, hard rock she had been carrying in her chest all evening, and for the first time since she left the diner, she felt the tight knot in her stomach loosen, just a little, just enough to breathe again. Still, as she lay in bed that night, staring up at the cracked ceiling where the paint peeled away in long, thin strips, Lena couldn't help but feel the weight of everything she had lost, everything she couldn't give. She turned the crumpled napkin with Marianne's number over and over between her fingers, the paper soft and worn now, and even though she had done the right thing, even though her mother had said all the right words, the truth sat heavy in her chest. Tomorrow would come, and there would be no gift, no surprise, no sweater wrapped up in a neat little box. There would only be the same old struggles, the same bills piling up on the counter, the same half-empty kitchen cabinets. Doing the right thing hadn't changed any of that. And yet, somewhere deep inside, tucked away like a secret, there was a tiny spark of something new. Not hope exactly, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Morning came slow and gray, the weak sunlight barely filtering through the thin, tattered curtains of Lena's bedroom, casting pale stripes across the cracked walls and the sagging mattress where she lay curled up under a threadbare blanket, her body heavy with the kind of tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. In the kitchen, she could hear her mother moving quietly, the soft clatter of a spoon against a pot, the low hum of the old stove as it struggled to heat the thinnest oatmeal Lena could remember them having, stretched with extra water to make it last a few more days. She dragged herself out of bed, feet cold against the floor, and shuffled to the table where Maria sat, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of black coffee, her face lined with exhaustion, but smiling anyway, that small, tired smile she always gave Lena, like it was armor against the world. Lena sat down, pushing her spoon around in the watery oatmeal without much appetite. The silence between them, thick but not heavy, filled with a kind of understanding that didn't need words. Just as Lena picked up her spoon to force down a bite, a sharp, unexpected knock sounded at the door, loud and firm, not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the lazy thud of a delivery. Lena's head snapped up, her stomach twisting in a new kind of knot, and she saw her mother freeze halfway to taking a sip of coffee, her fingers tightening around the mug. They weren't expecting anyone. No one ever came by this early. For a second neither of them moved, the air in the apartment going still, the hum of the refrigerator sounding impossibly loud in the quiet. Then Maria rose slowly from her chair, smoothing her worn sweater with one hand. and moved to the door, her fingers hesitating just a moment on the lock. "Who is it?" she called, her voice steady but wary. There was a pause, and then a familiar voice, soft but clear, floated through the door. "It's Marianne, dear, from the diner." Lena's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack, and before she could think or stop herself, she was on her feet, moving toward the door just as her mother unlocked it and swung it open. Standing there in the dim light of the hallway was Marianne, wearing the same neat pink coat from the night before. But she wasn't alone. Beside her stood a woman Lena hadn't seen before. Tall, elegant, dressed in a simple cream blouse and dark slacks, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her presence calm but commanding in a way that filled the doorway without her even trying. The woman smiled warmly, stepping slightly forward as Marianne beamed at Lena, her eyes shining in a way that made something deep in Lena's chest crack open just a little. "Sweetheart," Marianne said, her voice thick with emotion. "I had a feeling we'd find you here." Maria looked from Lena to the two women, confusion flickering across her face, her hands tightening unconsciously at her sides. "I'm sorry," she said carefully, glancing toward Lena again. "What's going on?" The taller woman stepped forward then, offering her hand with a kind smile. "I'm Chloe Davenport," she said, her voice strong but kind. "Marianne is my mother." There was a beat of silence as that information settled into the small, worn kitchen, the name meaning nothing to Maria but pressing strangely against Lena's mind like it should matter, like she should recognize it. Marianne turned to Maria, her expression soft and serious. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said simply, and then, without waiting for an invitation, she and Chloe stepped gently inside, careful not to push, careful to leave space for Maria to close the door behind them. Henry was not here, because there was no Henry, only Marianne and Chloe, mother and daughter, carrying something between them that Lena could feel but not yet name. Chloe's gaze swept across the apartment, taking in the peeling paint, the sagging furniture, the stack of unopened bills on the counter. And her smile didn't falter, but it deepened with something that looked like certainty. "We came," Chloe said, her hands folding loosely in front of her, "because the police called us. They told us a young girl turned in a lost wallet. My mother knew immediately it had to be you." Lena felt herself flush, embarrassment and confusion knotting together under her skin. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but Chloe held up a hand gently. "After we left the diner," Chloe continued, "we made a few calls. We asked around. It didn't take much to learn about you, Lena." She said Lena's name like it mattered, like it meant something more than just a label. "Your friend Jessie told us everything," Chloe said, her voice dropping a little, warmer, more personal. "How you've been working after school, saving every penny. How you gave up what little you had without thinking twice. How you've been carrying more than any 14-year-old should have to." Maria's breath caught audibly in the stillness, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. Lena stood frozen, the napkin with Marianne's number still tucked in the pocket of her hoodie, suddenly feeling like the floor beneath her feet might give way. "We didn't come here just to return the money," Marianne said, her voice steady and sure. "We came to offer you something more." Maria's voice came out small and shaking. "Offer what?" Chloe smiled then, a smile that carried weight and promise. "A fresh start," she said. "A real one." For a long moment no one spoke, the words hanging heavy in the small, worn kitchen, thicker than the scent of coffee and thin oatmeal. Lena stared at Chloe, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear over it, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. Maria clutched the back of a chair like she needed it to keep standing. Her face caught between hope and fear, between the life she knew and something too impossible to believe. Chloe stepped forward, her voice steady, clear. "We want to help you. Both of you, not because you asked, not because you owe us anything, but because you deserve a chance to live, not just survive." Maria shook her head slightly, her lips parted, struggling to find the words. "Why?" she whispered, the question raw. "Because we can," Marianne said simply, her eyes shining. And because we should, Chloe smiled gently and continued. We can move you to a safe place, help you with bills, with school, with everything you've been carrying alone for too long. Lena deserves a future where she can focus on being a kid again, not worrying how to keep the lights on. Lena's throat burned, her vision blurring. She turned to her mother, who was looking back at her with eyes so full of emotion that Lena felt like she might break just from seeing it. If you say no, Chloe said softly, we will walk away, no strings attached. But if you say yes, it's a new beginning. Maria covered her mouth with one hand, tears finally spilling over, silent and full of all the nights she had stayed strong for Lena when she had no strength left. Lena moved to her, wrapping her arms tightly around her waist, feeling her mother tremble. Lena lifted her head, looking at Chloe and Marianne, her voice small but sure. Okay, she said, her heart hammering against her ribs, her body still too scared to believe it but needing to hope. Maria nodded through her tears, holding Lena closer. Okay, she whispered. And just like that, the cracks in their worn-out little world didn't seem quite so wide anymore. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.